Okay, welcome to part 2 of the all faculty meeting for summer quarter. Thank you for being here. We just finished part 1 talking about the fall and winter quarters, and now I want to move to the budget discussion. In many ways, this is a very difficult discussion for me because of the timing. This is nowhere near the process that I would have preferred to use for these massive conversations. But you'll see, based on the timing of the discovery, that the timing was what it was. So hopefully, at least some, if not all of you, have had the opportunity to attend the weekly college budget presentations that Terrence Chow has been doing. I think we've had 3 thus far. They're on Tuesday mornings. I'm going to be talking a little bit from the information of the 21st presentation that focused on the instruction expenses, at least in part. If you have not seen those, they are recorded, and you can reach out to Tony Stankovich in the president's office to get access to the recordings. I'm not going to dig into all of the detail of that 1-hour presentation, but suffice it to say that over the past 5 to 6 years, the overall trend of revenue versus expenses have gone in opposite directions. So even before COVID, it turns out that there were structural challenges that the college was facing as expenses continued to rise while revenue was falling. And the primary sources of declining revenue before COVID really were a primary source of declining revenue really was the international students. And as Terrence pointed out, the amount of revenue that we get from international students is significantly higher than any other type of student. So even though a population like Running Start was increasing, with a decline in the international population, the overall revenue was declining. Back in the Allen Ward days, North had built up a healthy reserve that it turns out we were living off of. And so once Terrence came in as a special consultant back in the spring quarter and began digging into the finances, and then when he became the interim vice president of finance administration, once Dr. Crawford came in, he and the business office really started digging in. And they found out that essentially the college had been overspending and unsustainably digging into our reserves. COVID certainly accelerated and made the situation worse. There are costs associated with COVID, and there are continued declines in revenue that have exaggerated the situation. Now, unfortunately, with the COVID challenge, there is still a lot that's unknown. And we do have some good news, although it's one-time good news. We got some of the CARES money that we were able to use for students. We got some of the CARES money that we were able to use for institution. But the CARES money was not even really enough to cover all of the expenses directly due to COVID. And so we are still figuring out how to use some of that temporary CARES money. There's a specific part of the CARES Act that, at least in Washington, is known as the GEER Act, the GEER, that is governor's emergency funds for education. And so the state board, working with the governor's office, has put together a plan for approximately $44 million to be made available to the community and technical colleges. 44 sounds like a lot until we remember that there are 34 community and technical colleges. And so the money has been divided into buckets. The largest bucket will reimburse institutions for declining enrollments due to COVID. A second bucket will work on providing funds for institutions for student supports, especially for students of color. And the last and smaller bucket provides grants for institutions that had professional technical costs that were due to the disruption of COVID. So we are working on applying. Once the application is available, we will apply for some of those funds as well. So the two formulas for the first two categories and then the grant should provide us some additional temporary relief. The legislature did not go into special session, which there is a good and a bad to that. The good is that if they had gone into special session, we know they would have said you have 15% less money to work with. The bad of them not going into special session is that we don't know at this point. And so there is still guidance to be cautious with our money, to not spend above 85%, but that is not a hard line. Some colleges are paying attention to that. Other colleges are ignoring it. At this point, the Seattle colleges is trying to stay within 85% of our initial allocation. Overall instruction, and I put that in quotes because it includes direct instruction as well as some of the instructional support like the library, e-learning, teaching and learning center, and tutoring, make up approximately 70% of the overall operating budget. So we are the largest chunk of the overall operating budget. And of our instructional operating expenses, the majority of those are, quote, fixed costs. And that was a term that Terrence defined in his presentation as essentially salaries in full-time employees, permanent employees, as well as known expenses that we cannot ignore. The overall budget planning processes for this academic year really started before Warren left. So Warren set a date of March 20th for us to have a budget plan in place for what we thought was going to be the 2020-2021 academic year. In that budget planning, we planned for approximately a 5% decrease in the overall operating budget. So some of you may remember and participated in the conversations around what changes, refinements, and reductions that we put on the table relative to those that budget planning stage. There was, fortunately, as we combed our budgets, some areas where we had money allocated, but it was not money that we were going to spend. So the deans did a great job of identifying those sources, and we were able to fold those in to the overall reduction plan for instruction that was submitted on March 20th. Right about March 20th, right about the time that Warren left, is when COVID really hit hard. And so we went through a stretch with acting President Kurt Buttleman in place where the district and the board was really trying to wrap its head around the impacts of COVID. And then Dr. Crawford joined us in June. The reason why I cite Dr. Crawford coming onto campus was because she brought with her, obviously, a new set of eyes, and then installed Terrence Chow as the interim vice president of administrative services. At about the same time, Choi Halliday joined as the vice chancellor of administrative services, and that started in earnest some very in-depth conversations about the budgets at North, South, Central, and at the district. Those in-depth investigations are what uncovered the, quote, structural challenges that all three colleges are facing in terms of this long-term decline in revenue and long-term increase in expenses. So through conversations in the executive team, each area of the college has been asked to prepare 15, 20, and 25% budget reduction plans for our operating budgets. Now, that does not mean that each area will be required to take 15, 20, or 25% budget reduction plans, but Dr. Crawford's approach is that she wants us to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, as we have calculated it, when we count structural and COVID challenges, is 25%. And I'll talk about what 25% is for instruction on the next slide. The process, all of that was uncovered in late June, early July. This is where I go back to one of my earlier comments. This is not the way that any of us want to be doing this. What I mean by that is, and I remember being a faculty and thinking about this every summer, that summer comes, faculty go away, a lot of you go away, and then the serious conversations start. Please believe me that that was not the intent, and that in all sincerity, these structural challenges were not uncovered until really July. The next step is that each vice president will be presenting our area's reduction plans to the newly formed Budget Advisory Committee. I know that Jim and I believe Vince Offenbach, Jim Jewell and Vince Offenbach represent the faculty on the Budget Advisory Committee. And I know that they've already been meeting and that they have already heard presentations on self-support areas as well as on reserve plans. So they will hear, coming up in mid-August, presentations from each of the areas. And then at the same time, the executive team will be considering those plans as well. Recommendations will come from the executive team to the Budget Advisory Committee. Decisions will be made, and then that budget plan will be sent to the district office. I want to remind folks what Terrence has reminded us of often. Terrence Chow has reminded us often that budget plans are just that, plans. And so there will be some adapting throughout the year, but we could not wait, for instance, for the legislature to get in session in January and then start making the budget cuts, because we would then be compressing a year's worth of budget cuts into 6 months. I have lived in that world at South Seattle College the year that I was interim president, and it is not the way to do the work of the college. We had to make some drastic budget cuts at South midstream in order to stay within budget. And believe me, as hard as the process is that we're in now, it's better than if we were waiting for the legislature to make their decisions in January. I want to give you a sense of what 15, 20, and 25% look like for the overall operational budgets in instruction. So recognize these are just the operational budgets. They do not include revenue budgets, other soft budgets, grant budgets, etc. We are roughly $21 million in our operating budgets. So 15%, roughly 3.2, 20%, roughly 4.3, 25% is roughly $5.4 million. At these levels, there has already been and there will be significant job loss. And I do want to acknowledge the pain of that job loss. And I also want to be explicit here that we know that that also means part-time faculty not getting sections to teach. Often job loss is considered only when we're talking about full-time. I need folks to know that we also recognize that job loss is the same for part-timers as it is for full-timers. So please know that these conversations are being taken very seriously and thoughtfully, but also please know that these are significant plans that we are being asked to put together. The Instructional Budget Planning Group has put together criteria for making the reduction plans for instruction, and this gives you a good idea of what those priorities are. We are refocusing on our core instructional mission, which includes at least getting students to and through degree and certificate programs, helping students attain sustainable employment through courses, programs, and services, helping students successfully transfer through courses, programs, and services, using an equity mindset and reinforcing our attention to underserved populations of students, reducing and or eliminating duplicative programs in workforce across the district, using program viability data to assess costs versus student enrollment, retention, and completion by program, and a review of the overall instructional organization. And I can talk a little bit more about that if there are questions, but please know that we are also looking at the organization of instruction along with the instructional programs and classes. I want you to know that the deans and I are fighting hard for instruction while also balancing the needs of the whole college. And what I mean by that is it has really become clear to the deans and myself that the cutting and the planning that we're talking about at this point removes or reduces a number of class sections that we believe is would potentially permanently damage the college. And so we are, in addition to presenting the reduction plans, we are also presenting what the impact on enrollments and on completion. We think that those plans, those reductions would bring about. Now, that's not to say that we don't think we should take any cuts. With the size of instruction and the size of these cuts, we are going to have to take cuts. But we are arguing strongly for instructional programs and classes to remain, as many as possible, remain on the schedule. And I also applaud Dr. Crawford and the executive team because although we've been asked to look at and create these reduction plans, there is also acknowledgement that there are some areas of the college that are going to be cut more significantly than others. Some of that is due to COVID, and then some of that is just due to the budget situation that we find ourselves in. I do believe very strongly that we will come out a more sustainable college while retaining our core values and mission, but we are going to look differently coming out of not only the budget situation, but also coronavirus. Again, I wanted to make sure that there was a predominant amount of time for you all to ask questions or have discussion. I've seen, caught out of the corner of my eye, some things coming up through the chat. So just like in part one, I want to stop the share. I can go back to slides if people need me to, but I want to stop the share and I really want to turn it over to you all. Have there been any questions in chat that any deans or choral have noticed that they want to bring up first?
Just clarification on who serves on which budget committees.
Okay, let me, oh, I'm sorry. Faculty reps on back are Vince and Bear. Jim served on the district budget task force. And Jim, I think there was there another North faculty on the district?
The other North reps would be DeAndre and Tony Castro. But there wasn't a specifically faculty rep from each campus. It was one rep from each college council and then a rep from each of the unions. And we doubled up AFT when Tish Lopez joined Annette Stouffer as the AFT reps on that task force.
I do see something else in the chat that I applaud you, Brian, for putting this in there. Brian Holt has, as a former Budget Advisory Committee member, has a note in there, a correction to my narrative, that the Budget Advisory Committee at the time did warn Dr. Mitsui, Dr. O'Keefe, and Dr. Brown that we were using international funds as a backup. to the backup savings account. The most notable warning to interim president Mary Ellen O'Keefe just before the bus crash. I know those conversations were happening. I don't know what happened in the stretch of time that I was at South, the 4.5 years that I was at South. But I will say that when I was at South, the narrative was that North, for the most part, was okay because of the reserves that had been built up in international. There was a painful year. I'm looking at some of the deans. I think it was 16, 17, or maybe it was just 2017, where there were some significant budget cuts that happened. But then shortly after that, instructional initiatives were built in, and that funding came directly from the reserves. So, Brian, thank you for that narrative correction and the historical perspective on the budget situation.
Pete, can I offer up something that is not really about the numbers of the budget, but more about the emotional impact that we're all feeling from all of the budget news every week?
Absolutely.
And this is something that I'm preaching out through every group of faculty that I talk to, is that we need to find ways when things are bad to be positive and creative. Some of the opportunities that I've been trying to create for myself is there's a group of faculty that we are working on a civic engagement pathway. So it's using the pathways mapping model to actually lead to a 2-year AA degree that would also equip students to be more civically engaged. We're working on what can we offer up performance-wise through the space of stage 1 when people can't actually physically access it. And also looking for ways to kind of take even greater advantage of our strength. On our campus, we have Zola Mumford, who is a regional expert in science fiction. We have a published dystopian author, and then we have incredible scientists. And so there's an opportunity to create maybe a pathway around science fiction and science fact. These are things that don't cost money, but they actually allow us to do the thing that we do that makes us love our jobs, which is be creative and be student focused. And I think we need to find those opportunities. I last went through cuts in a different industry, in the nonprofit arts industry. And the emotional impact was very much the same. And that was the way that we kind of supported each other to get out, was to really focus on what can we do creatively, productively, positively while we're suffering the cuts, so that we're not only cutting, but we're making at the same time. And it means we have to be creative, and we have to come up with solutions that don't cost money. But I think we have to find those right now. If we only get together and talk about cuts, we're just going to crush each other. Yep. I know I'm doing that sometimes.
And I absolutely agree with you, Jim, and I applaud the number of times that I've heard you voice this in public meetings, and I know you're talking about it outside as well. And a couple of other examples, I know that Arts, Humanities, and Social Science, working with the incoming new Social Justice and Intersectional Studies faculty, is re-envisioning what some of the relationships between social sciences and humanities look like. I know that Heather Price is working hard on climate justice initiative with faculty from across the college to really tap into our strength of not only strong sciences, but also strong awareness in all of the disciplines. And I know more good news with Ann Murkowski and Kaylin Owens and others, and thank you, Ann Richardson, as well, securing a new grant on STEM study for primarily focused on women in STEM, which will, again, tap into our strong STEM program. I know in Prof Tech that we have a new international accounting BAS coming online, and we are really establishing ourselves as a leader in both business and accounting, as well as in other areas. And then I know that Curtis's group is, I say Curtis's group, sorry for saying it that way. I saw Curtis's face. Basic and Transitional Studies faculty and staff and administrators are re-envisioning how they interact with students and what they look like. So Jim, to your point, I read a quote recently that said, I'm going to paraphrase and I'm going to butcher it, but something like the worst use of energy is to focus on negativity. The best use of energy is to focus on creativity. And I tape that up and put it on my computer at home so that when I'm feeling in my bad, dark moments, that I remember to rechannel and think creatively. So thank you, Jim, for that. And also thank you. I know you were one of the first, maybe not the only, but one of the first who brought up the idea of putting together welcome videos for students to use as both recruiting and marketing. And so I believe Sonia Renner, if she hasn't already, is going to be reaching out to capture some of you giving welcome statements so that we can make those, we can post those and make them available to the students. Other comments, questions, thoughts, discussion?
This is Curtis. I'll only add to Jim. I appreciate what you said a lot, Jim. And I'll only add, too, that you can't cut your way out of a crisis. What this creative energy that Jim's talking about is also the way we're going to get out of this. We're going to find new ways to become more relevant and better at what we do. And we're all doing it in our own separate areas. And if we all keep at it, and maybe with a little help with a large unemployment problem right now in Seattle, we will climb our way out of this.
Yeah, I mean, some other bits of good news. The summer enrollment, if you've been paying, if you've seen the numbers, our state enrollments, which is really our largest enrollment group in the summer, we're at 105%, approximately 105%. So the students are continuing to come to us and in more numbers than we've seen in a couple of years. My wife works for a group that she's part of a team that works with recently unemployed individuals and industries that are going through layoffs. And she provides information for educational funding for those individuals. And she is on large 100 people meetings twice a day. So the demand is as great on us, for us as ever, which, by the way, is a big part of the message that we're taking to Olympia and taking to Washington, D.C. We are needed to get out of this. Again, if now more than ever. One other thing, the biologist in me can't help but point out the Darwin quote, which is, it's not the strongest that survive, it's the most adaptable. And that is another thing that I have taped to my computer at home. Other thoughts, comment? Yeah, Joe. Oh, you're on mute, Joe.
Okay, so looking back on the last time we went through this in 2009, 2010, it turns out accounting's peak enrollment was in 2012 because community college enrollment tends to be counter-cyclical with unemployment. But there's also a lag time because people first get unemployed, they kind of struggle for a while. It takes them a while to make that decision to go back to school, to upgrade their credentials, knowledge, and experience. And so, so one thing that's hopeful in that, not necessarily this year, but year after that and year after that, I think we can expect greater enrollment because of the difficulties people will be in. But the other part in terms of what is going on now is that we want to make sure that we still maintain capacity, that we can meet that growth in the coming years, and that we are flexible in our decision making at this point in time to be able to retain that capacity.
Yep, absolutely. And some of the key words that you use there are the exact words that the deans and I are using as we're building our case for instruction. We are talking about capacity specifically. We are talking about the situation that we are about to enter into, and we've started in, which is never will demand be higher at the same time that the state and federal government is going to say that resources are lower. And we enter this challenge that this is obviously not the first time. You know, we ride this roller coaster a lot, but believe me, the energy and pressure that's being put on Olympia by higher education, and in particular by the 2 years, the State Board of Community Technical Colleges and the 34 of us, is really ramping up. And there are some legislators who get it and who understand. There are others who don't. But we are hoping that the voices of those who get it will be stronger in January, because if not, we will be in a situation where we have a lot of unemployed and not enough training opportunities for them to get out of that situation. I literally had a day about 2 weeks ago at home where I was working on budget reduction plans, and my wife was in the room right next door working on a report where she was quantifying the 5,000 individuals that were recently laid off in King County that are looking for retraining through community and technical colleges. So the two of us together wrote a joint letter that, to describe the situation that our household works in, to shine a light on how necessary community and technical colleges are now.
Curtis again.
Yeah,
So I know that Olympia listens somewhat to presidents, more to maybe faculty unions, and maybe most of all to students. And I'm just wondering, maybe we should try to organize some sort of student push to back some of this in Olympia. That's all.
Yeah, those plans are already underway. In some ways, the legislature announcing that they were not going to meet until January has allowed for the beginning of the mobilization of the different groups to hit Olympia. I know that there are some letters that are already being sent, but as we get into the fall, we will really be gearing up for visits and really inundating Olympia with messages from us. It worked very well for the regional pay initiative a couple years back. So we know it can work. We're going to mobilize even more, recognizing, of course, that there are going to be a lot of competing interests in Olympia, and there are a lot of institutions that are going to suffer from this regressive tax system that Washington is in, and the declining revenue base that the legislature has to work with. But yes, to your point, Curtis, those conversations have already started. Those mobilization plans have already started. Other questions, thoughts? And again, if anything's come up in chat, please let me know.
There's a question in the chat about the OCE&E and pathways between there and our classrooms from Coral.
Yeah, so one of the reasons given for building OCE&E was enable direct referral of unemployed folks to become students. Is it being strengthened? Yeah, so a lot of the work that John Lederer has been focused on as the liaison between OCE&E and the college has focused on that. We now include in particular the employees of workforce education into our regular college committees. So Jeanette Miller, who's the director over there, now sits on instructional council and comes to the instructional council and student services meeting. And then I also know that, and Aaron or William, you may speak better to this than I, but that bridges between workforce ed and workforce instruction are being made. We still have a lot of work to do on the transfer side, as well as just in general, making that pipeline even bigger. But this situation that we're in now has really shined a light on it, because the student support dollars are increasing. The student need is increasing. And so we are primed for, if we can get it right, we are primed for having a pipeline of students coming our way through the OCE&E. Other questions, thoughts, comments? Yep, thank you, Coral. I saw that in chat. I do want to say that we are going to be a narrower institution in terms of instruction. We are going to have to let go of some things that I know are near and dear. And again, I know that's going to come with some job loss. But to Joe's point about capacity, we are looking at areas where not only we can maintain, but we can build capacity. And part of this includes conversations across the district where BPIs and others are looking at where each college shines and tapping into that. So I know, for instance, that there will be some programs let go at a college where the other colleges shine. And that is not just going to be, as everybody believes, everything going to Central. There are some things that are going to come away from Central as well. So despite what I know, there are some bad feelings towards being in a district. This is one of those instances where we are going to be stronger together and be able to serve our greater student population base by working together. I've never seen more collaboration than I'm seeing at this point. Other questions or thoughts or comments?
Just throwing it out there because there's a lot of faculty on here on this Zoom call, but as we're all remote, the idea of pooled enrollment I find interesting, and I would love to kind of figure out a way where if South had 10 students and we had 10 students and Central had 10 students, we could run a class. I don't know what you all think about that, but especially in this time, the campus-based class is almost non-existent. So
let me throw a little bit of history in before folks chime in with their thoughts. And some of you may remember this. We have tried pooled enrollments in the past, kind of based on a WAOL model. We didn't get it exactly right when we did it with the library courses, but we learned a lot. And so I think, to Curtis's point, this is something we could try. We would want to get into it more intentionally, both on the faculty workload side, but also on the logistics piece. There were issues with, is it one Canvas shell or 3 Canvas shells and things like that. But yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of things that we need to start talking about. So if folks have ideas about pooled enrollment or a willingness, chime in now or let your dean know and we can pursue those. And I'd be curious to hear people's thoughts too. If not on that,
Jim,
yeah, go ahead, Jim.
This is Jim Eaton. My initial reaction is just it seems to make a lot of sense to at least have one class that runs than having to cancel 3.
I just wrote myself a note, and Curtis, help me remember this. Maybe we can bring this up again tomorrow, plant a seed tomorrow, and then maybe use some time on the 7th to play it out a little more. I'll do some digging on the previous attempt, and I think there was either an MOU or a resolution, Tracy, you may remember, that resulted from the last time we tried it, but I am absolutely game to give it another go. Especially when not only is instruction remote, but even the support services are remote. And because that was a challenge last time as well, but we wouldn't face that challenge. Other questions, comments, thoughts? We've got time. I don't want to cut this off if there are, but I'm also hearing silence. So let me ask one more time, and I'll open it up to either fall, winter, COVID, or budget situation. One last call from me. Okay, so hearing none, I do want to thank you all for taking time. For those of you who are teaching, I hope the quarter is going as good as can be expected. For those who are taking time away, I hope that you are getting some opportunities to enjoy the weather and to recharge. Please remember the staff who are still hard at work. And one thing that I'll say as we start to roll towards the fall again, to keep those folks in mind and be careful with saying something like, how was your vacation or how was your summer break? I also want to thank you for the work that you did in the winter and spring, and for the work that you're doing as we gear up for the fall. Please know that we are talking about the winter, and I want to make that as easy and smooth for you as possible as well. One of the mantras that we're using as we think about the winter is we want to make sure that our energy goes towards getting things right instead of working on something that we may have to abruptly turn away from if this COVID situation is not tamed. If everybody's up for it, turn on your cameras. Feel free to open up your mics and enjoy the community of 45 of us. And again, a huge thank you from me as I turn off my mic and let everybody see and say hi to everybody else. Thank you all. Be well, everybody.
You too.